Well, welcome to the Spirit Soul series, and today's episode 3 of the Spirit Soul series. And we're going to continue off from where we left last week. We spoke about, I think we almost did all the five main elements of the Bhagavad Gita, where we spoke about Jiva, we spoke about, I forgot the second one. What is
Ishvara,
it?
Ishvara.
Ishvara. Then we spoke about the third was Prakriti, then the fourth was Kala, and the fifth was Karma.
Correct.
So
Yeah, that's
we
right.
spoke about all of them, but I think we kind of have some leftover thing, no, that we have to
Correct,
discuss
correct.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Correct. Yeah. Thank you, Kannan.
no problem,
Thank you.
Supeji.
What we'll do is we'll just quickly complete a section that I said I would cover last time, I promised. So that is really about Dronacharya and his dealings with Ekalavya.
Hmm.
Remember
Yeah.
Ekalavya? So Ekalavya was somebody from a tribe called the Nishada tribe, and he and that tribe was known to constantly they were known to make trouble for the ruling the government. And
Hmm.
at the times that we are talking of, that was the Kaurava dynasty. So they were known over generations to be like antisocial elements or to be problematic people to deal with. So they were given a whole area in the forest to live there. But they didn't stop with that, and they would keep trying to go beyond their rights and privileges and so on. So this is the background in which Ekalavya, that is one of them, a Nishada boy, approaches Dronacharya for training in archery. And Dronacharya is this is a controversial point, and it often comes up in discussions, especially amongst nowadays with young people, as that it is misunderstood that Dronacharya discriminated against this Nishada boy and refused to teach him. The reason why he did this was because shortly before this, they had come upon this boy. No, no, sorry, this happens a little later. Dronacharya knows that the Nishada boy's character is not good. His potential to become a competent archer was definitely there. And through Dronacharya's powers and his tapasya and his austerity, he could see the character of the boy is not good. So there are two things, there is competence and there is character. Now, if you put a weapon in the hands of a boy or a woman who lacks character, then it's like you're aiding and abetting danger for a lot of others. And with this in mind, he refuses, he turns down this request. So subsequently, the Nishada boy, that is um, this our Ekalavya, he watches and learns. He watches the training that Dronacharya gives Arjuna, and in the process, he picks up a lot because obviously there is some keenness, and it is maybe driven by some kind of ambition, and that natural inclination is there. So he becomes an expert archer. And some years down the line, or some time later, while they are walking, they see a dog appearing in front the Pandavas, and they are with their teacher Dronacharya. This is, of course, all much before the Mahabharata war. They see a dog appearing whose mouth has been completely stitched up by arrows. Now, what had happened was while Ekalavya was practicing, the dog kept barking, and Ekalavya got so irritated that actually, it's the natural instinct of a dog to bark, right? But this Ekalavya was not having any of it. So he shoots arrows so expertly, like from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top and left to right and right to left, aim only at the dog's mouth, so that the dog's mouth appeared as if it had been stitched up with arrows. When this dog appeared, immediately Dronacharya understood. Arjuna was amazed and awestruck. Dronacharya understood that this is really coming, this is the handiwork of that boy who had once approached him, and Drona was aware all along and not interfering with his looking on slyly or hiding from behind bushes and trees and learning. And Dronacharya asks, I think, like, who's there and who's done this, and will you please show yourself? So Ekalavya comes forward, and it's obvious that everyone is awestruck by what's happened. But Dronacharya sees the dangers, and that he feels his original hunch, the feeling he had, the fear that this boy doesn't have character. If he starts harming innocent creatures just because they get in the way of his well-being, without any religious principle to back it up, then he can do big time harm. Therefore, when Ekalavya bows down and says, I consider myself to be your student and you to be my guru, and I've been learning like this, please bless me. Dronacharya, and I think either Ekalavya offers or Dronacharya demands Guru Dakshina, and he deliberately asks for his thumb so that to disable him, like we disable certain apps on our phone, which are creating problems or slowing down the phone or corrupting it. He deliberately asked this. So by the standards of today, it might be considered a very cruel thing to do. But those times were different, and even after Dronacharya does this, Ekalavya, being the kind of boy he was, he carries on learning with the other hand. So then Krishna intervenes and Krishna challenges him to a fight, and actually Ekalavya dies in that fight. But those who die, it's understood that those who die at the hands of the Supreme Lord will get liberated. So that is the end of Ekalavya. And this is also, this kind of diplomacy is also to make sure that Ekalavya doesn't stay on and participate in the Mahabharat battle, because then he would have made big time trouble with his archery and with his misguided sense of right and wrong, and with his lack of character, he would have been brought up like this by Duryodhana. So these are the different considerations. It's not really only that he was from a tribe or a low caste, and therefore not being a Kshatriya or a Brahmana, a Kshatriya, he was not allowed to teach, because the same Dronacharya later shows, as we discussed in the last class, very big heart in accepting Drupad's son Drishtadyumna as a student, knowing fully well that this Drishtadyumna has been created just to bring about the death of Drona himself. So if somebody could be so detached to put his head on the whatever, on the chopping block, knowing that in eventually the death is going to occur, why would he discriminate against this boy just because he's from the wrong caste? The actual understanding is this. It's like, it's valid even today. Sometimes as teachers, we come across people with a kind of real kink in their brain. And when they are asking questions about more confidential matters in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavad Gita, we are a little on our alert, because we kind of sense that this guy is going to misuse the information. Often it's also girls, like in my batch where I teach, that they've got all the wrong ideas and they're coming to take words out of your mouth, which then they will quote and back up their whole little plan, and then go online and set off a big controversy. So we are on our guard. We don't really always tell them they don't part with the information. So that's the mood in which.
So it's basically like what you're saying is that when it comes to Ekalavya and Drona kind of understood the kind of character that he comes from, and the kind of like just the his nature, basically understood that of being somebody that is misguided, as you use the word misguided, right? So
Yes,
that
sure.
could be a problem, as you said, like in the Mahabharat war, where that could turn out to be completely it could be a detriment to like the humanity, like a lot of people could die in the process of that and all.
Sure,
I
correct.
didn't know that then that explanation actually makes a lot of sense, because that's
Sense,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
And the other reason why this story captures the imagination of young people now as a case of like caste-based discrimination is because in our times, and in even maybe a couple of generations before my time, independence is given so much importance. You don't really need a teacher. So Ekalavya managed without a teacher. What's the big deal? He should be revered for doing it. Yes, sure. I mean, he has to be given credit for having learned without being directly under a teacher, but just by watching it. He also has to be revered for giving that thumb when he was asked to give it. But he was that kind of don't care, brazen person, and not being under a teacher to guide no matter what you're doing. A doctor suddenly decides, he's not going to go to medical school and do a proper course and get a certificate. He'll just learn everything on his own. He knows how to use the different tools and sets himself up. He's going to create havoc in society if he's driven by the wrong intentions. So the teacher, it's a very relevant story to what we are going to hear today in chapter 2, because the need for a teacher, a spiritual teacher, and teacher in any profession, and to be under the teacher and to be able sometimes to submit to the correction and the authority of that person, even if it doesn't suit us.
Because
So,
it helps you, I guess, like it helps you to understand things better, no? Like
yeah, and absolutely, yeah. Understand, and also sometimes we get carried away by our own egoistic aspirations. So somebody has to be there to slam us, as we are going to see. Krishna slaps Arjuna really right at the start of chapter 2, calling him a fool, calling him an impotent Kshatriya,
mm,
all this Clybium, that means impotent. And for a Kshatriya, nothing is worse because he's known to be brave, virile. He's
mm,
given the right to have many wives in the hope that he will produce many other brave Kshatriya type, genetically Kshatriya type children. More wives, more chances are there. So that whole section of society can be kept strong. So in chapter 2, basically, it starts off from where chapter 1 ended, which is, as you will remember, Kanan, Arjuna has put down the Gandiva bow and said, I will not fight and
mm,
I'm very distressed, etc. Now, the reason why Arjuna refused to fight, there are 5 reasons, and at least the first 3 are going to be addressed by Krishna in the first half of chapter 2 that we'll be looking at today.
mm,
I don't think we're going to be able to cover the whole chapter because it's one of the 2 longest chapters at 72 verses. So we'll look at about 35, 36 verses and cover what comes in that. And there you have the main reason Arjuna gives is, of course, compassion. And which is something you and I can also relate to, that, how can
mm,
we be so cruel to people who are my teachers and my relatives? The second reason he gives basically is he's scared of sinful reactions.
mm,
What will happen if he does this terrible sin of killing his teachers and mentors? The third reason Arjuna gives is that what is the use of getting victory and winning the kingdom if there's nobody there to share the enjoyment with? You see,
mm,
it's because if everybody is dead at the end of the Mahabharat war, his cousins are dead and so on. The fourth reason that Arjuna gives is he's worried about the destruction of the family line and dynasty, how women are left widowed, and there are no men to guide the family. So the women then get into illicit dealings with wrong characters and produce children for a poor stock. The children are a poor stock. When they grow up, they are not going to bother to do this Pinda Pradhan ritual every year annually to remember the dead ancestors, the people who passed on. And the last is plain indecision. You just can't decide what's the right thing to do. So Krishna tackles these 5 in the course of chapter 2. In this first half, he straightaway tackles this business about compassion. And how he tackles it, first he really slams Arjuna like a good teacher, slams in the sense like we just discussed, calling him, asking him, you're born a Kshatriya, you're born an Aryan. In this context, Aryan really means someone who comes
pure.
from a pure and a civilization which knows what's the value of life. And the value of life basically is God realization. So that's some knowledge that's actually not available to the majority of people.
Mm,
They go to the temple and come back, or they may not believe. That's different. But to know that this human birth, you were just talking about apes and humans being quite close to each
mm,
other in the evolution cycle. So the value of the human birth is basically you can ask questions and you start thinking and pondering. Now, if that, and particularly this Aryans, which includes the Kshatriyas, are know all this. And then suddenly, how is he becoming so nervous and scared and so on? So it's like an impurity. And then, like I described a little bit ago, he's also slammed for his and called like impotent, meaning basically that after being a Kshatriya, you're just a Kshatriya in name. That's what it
mm,
means. Like if a Brahmin by birth decides to be deceitful and greedy for money, this is just it is just a name that he is a Brahmin. It's like making a mockery. A Brahmana by birth is supposed to be learned enough to show detachment from money. He has to get what he needs for himself and his family.
mm.
But if he starts running after money and starts doing duplicitous things, this is just making a mockery. In the same breath, he's called a
So,
impotent
like, actually,
Kshatriya.
there's I think in the previous, it was in the previous class or the first, I'm not sure, but we were
Yeah,
discussing that, the caste system essentially is like, if you can, it's like based on your, like behavior almost, like, if you do if you do like Shudra kind of activities, you'll become a Shudra. If you do like Brahmin kind of activities, you are a Brahmin. So it's like, when people say Brahmin, it's like, okay, it means the Brahmin mindset, let's say. Let's put it that way. Like
Yeah.
not the actual like Brahmin like that.
Right? It's two things. Uh, when you come to chapter 4, you get a definition of how these varnas or the four castes are determined. Krishna himself says this, Chatur Varnyam Maya Srishtim Guna Karma Vibhagasha. That's the Vibhagam or the divisions are made by Guna and Karma. Guna literally means quality, and Karma means the activity that matches the quality. So it's a little bit like circular logic. You
Mm.
and in those times where caste purity was maintained by carefully arranged marriages, and the right person marries the right and produces the right type of progeny, the two things coincide. That is, both the mentality and the natural inclination to a particular type of action or activity, which is the karma here. And then they produce also people, their sons also come out like that, their sons, and then the children in general. Now when we look at but at the same time, there's also a lot of flexibility, mobility to go up and down the caste system. Correct. So what you said is really correct. So the first point that Krishna is going to clarify is this point about compassion.
Mm.
And just note that in the very first verse, when Arjuna is addressing Krishna in chapter 2, he addresses him by the term Madhusudana. Now, there are so many names for Krishna and so many names by which Arjuna is also known, but specifically Madhusudana. And here we need the commentaries of the Acharyas, to open up the text for us. So they give their insight and their whole take. Like, the book has come out and you have book reviews, or a film has come out and you have film reviews. So it needs someone who is expert and qualified to open up the contents. So one of our acharyas in this line, and every sampradaya will have their own set of acharyas who've done their own take on the Bhagavad Gita, because these things can be looked at from unlimited angles of vision. That is true. The Shastra is like that. The basic principles remain, but how you interpret and apply, you can get new angles of vision by qualified people. So this Madhusudana is a reference to Krishna as the god who killed the Madhukaitava demons. There's a whole pastime like that. And what Arjuna is saying here is, you who killed the Madhukaitava demons, please also kill the doubts that are surfacing in my mind. That's the reason why he is being appealed to as Madhusudana. I mean, Krishna understands and Arjuna understands, and then so the acharyas tell us. Now, this edition of the Bhagavad Gita, like we discussed before the recording started, before this class formally started, translated by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, that is Srila Prabhupada, founder Acharya of ISKCON, whose photo I have here behind me. He very much relies on the acharyas in the Vaishnava Sampradaya in that line, and that's where this explanation is coming from for why the word Madhusudana is used. Now, as for Arjuna, you see Krishna addresses him as Partha, because just invoking that sense of pride in him, that after all he is the son of Pritha, that is another name for Kunti Devi, who is a sister of Vasudeva, and therefore actually very much Krishna's cousin. They're cousin brothers here. So this play on different words, we need to be alert to get the hang of. Like sometimes I call you Siddharth and sometimes I call you Kannan. Now Siddharth is because in a formal situation I feel that's better, like you're doing these podcasts. But when I write you in by WhatsApp, I invariably say hi Kannan and so on, like that. So names and what value is given to names is also something. It's a very important point that runs right through the Bhagavad Gita. So what about compassion? The point that's being made here is, what is the use of showing compassion for the dress of a drowning man? You show compassion for the man that's drowning, that's different. So why are you showing compassion for the dress? Somebody's drowning and the dress floats in a different direction. Why go running after the dress? Now, how this is to be understood is in this context. the body, the material body of each one of us is just like an outer covering or a dress. And the real stuff is the soul. And the real identity, even of all these relatives that Arjuna is hesitating to kill.
Hmm.
So that's like it's straight away at the start of the second chapter itself, Krishna is giving us, he's dishing it out, as we say in modern language. He is not um, playing hide and seek with the truth. He's coming right on and like it's really giving it to Arjuna. He's posing this question. So this is the substance. That is why this chapter in the English editions, it's called Contents of the Gita, Contents of the Gita summarized. So this is basically what the Bhagavad Gita is about, that it's telling you about the soul and hammering this point home. So that's one point, that Krishna is going to keep on hammering home that anyway these members whom you're scared to kill, they are going to die when their time is up. And when you mean die, kill them, you are really only destroying the body. The soul remains intact and moves on to its next destination. What has happened to you that you who should be familiar with all this has suddenly forgotten all of it because you're drowning in some kind of a sentimental approach? Now, what is the sentimental approach in the Bhagavad Gita is the normal approach for you and me in today's world. Because we are so naturally, someone were to tell us, why are you crying and why some dear person passed away, it's very difficult for us because we are so distant from all this knowledge. It's not there in our upbringing and education. And we are taught to identify so much with the body. Remember the story about the parrot in the cage? You're always polishing the cage. And the media and the economy and the market system constantly teaches you to order things to polish the cage, but not to give food to the parrot inside. So Arjuna is now going to have to kind of grapple with this hard-hitting information that there is no need to show so much sympathy and sentimental compassion, because even if his mentors die at his hands, that's only their physical body that's dying. The Atma moves on. So you have any questions or any comments up to this point?
Yeah, so you said like Madhusudana who killed Madhusudana is like the god who killed the Madhu Kaitana demons, right?
Krishna. Yeah.
Like who is the Madhu Kaitana demons actually?
Madhu and Kaitava were, to the best of my knowledge, I will correct this again next time, if I am wrong, Madhu Kaitava demons tried to steal the Vedas from Hayagriva. So finally Krishna was invoked and he had to put an end to their mischief. Madhu and Kaitava. So Sudana literally means someone who kills and destroys.
So when they say stole the Vedas, isn't like try to remove it from people's consciousness. That's what they mean. Or is it like
no, that's true. No, I think in this case, today to get into the details of that story will be a little difficult because I should also, like the Nishada, like the story with Ekalavi, I should brush it up and get the facts absolutely right. But the reason why he is doing this is because of the why he's being addressed as Madhusudana is because of his having done this pastime or this great feat of destroying the Madhukaitava demons.
Okay, and then also you said that Krishna calls Arjuna Partha, so that's like the importance of names. You had mentioned that names and stuff, like so even like Arjuna also calls Krishna, like doesn't he call him Sanjaya? Sanjaya?
No, Sanjaya is a different character. He's the assistant right through that Sanjaya that we are hearing about is an assistant to the blind king Dhritarashtra. Remember, that Sanjay is a different guy.
So that's why in between the Gita when they say Sanjay, I'm like, is Arjuna talking about Sanjay? Right. Or is he talking about Krishna? Like,
because there are two things happening. There is a dialogue happening far away with the blind king Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya sitting next to him and telling him what's happening on the battlefield because he's given this special vision as a boon by Vyasadeva. Then there is this whole scenario on the battlefield and conversation between Arjuna and Krishna. You see, like the first set, they're reporting what's happening here.
And then after that, you said, then you said like the body is like the dress that you wear. and the
Right,
soul
right. Yeah.
is like the body in that sense, where if you take that example, like, because
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, apart from this, like, yeah, nothing else, like, this is the only things that we
All
discussed,
right.
right?
Okay, thank you. Now, these verses in this section, they keep driving home this point about how losing the body at the time of death is like just changing garments, throwing away garments that get old and buying new garments for yourself. So different analogies are given. We are sometimes compared to passengers on a train. You know, most of us have had this experience. We get on a train, and for some time there are other co-passengers, and then someone says, "Ah, my station has come. I'm getting off, or I'll be getting off the train tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Can I have your address?" Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we are related to friends and our naturally family members and teachers and so on for a period of time. But when the station comes or when we have to get off, we really just give up this body and then we know nothing of
Hmm.
what the people we left behind, and they know nothing of where we've gone. So this is a truth that we just have to digest,
Hmm.
and because it puts us in a good position to face life and to face this world. It's just a fact. However, you might love someone, and however much you may be devoted, and how many years you may have spent with the person, and naturally the memories and the affection remains. But the hard, brutal fact is that when it's time for them to give up their body like an old garment and move on, or the other way around, when it's time for us to move on, there is nothing that can be done to change that situation. So anyway, it's
Hmm.
coming. So then the natural logic is, that's what Krishna is going to put out here. Natural logic is, then why invest so much affection in relationships that are invariably going to be temporary? Maybe 2 years, 20 years, 50 years. At the same time, how can we not invest affection in people who are doing so much for us, who are doing their responsibilities, and with whom we work? So there's basically a balance that has to come. There has to be the affection, otherwise how can units function, and how, why would you be motivated to do something for someone if there is no affection? And that's like a natural byproduct of dealings. But at the same time, it has to be tempered or sobered by the understanding, even if it's kept private, that one day this will all just fish, it will just vanish, and there's nothing you can do. Now, where does the detachment come from? This bhakti yoga is supposed to produce both deeper and deeper knowledge in the heart, and it is supposed to give that detachment. Some people have already progressed on this path in a previous life, so they take to this information like a duck takes to water.
Hmm.
They don't, it's different. Some people, they have a lot of trouble digesting this. Some people say, yes, this makes sense. That's true, like that. So, but at the same time, Krishna is promising in the 10th chapter here, the Dami Buddhi Yogamta, that is, I will keep giving you that intelligence and knowledge by which you can come closer and closer to me. So the more you practice Bhakti Yoga, which is the different angas of Bhakti Yoga, means you hear about the Lord, you speak about the Lord, so many things. You do Archana for the Lord, you worship the Lord, and so on. You surrender completely eventually. That detachment, which is otherwise so hard to get hold of, and that knowledge from within, what is what, it keeps coming, like it keeps building up in the heart.
Hmm.
Now, Arjuna
So,
is in a very, yeah, go on.
no, just saying that, like, I think you asked that question, like, what is the point of having relationships?
Of
Like, if
investing
yeah,
too much affection in
yeah,
relationship.
and when it's like temporary and all that stuff, I think, like, maybe it's because, like, this, I don't know, this might be like a philosophical answer, but I feel like this is the only thing that comes to my mind. Like, maybe it's because the soul wants to be loved, I think. So that's why it seeks the thing from outside, the
Oh, you're
outside
getting
somewhere else.
close. Oh, yes,
Huh.
yes, you're getting close. You're a very good student, Kanan. You're like a
Thank you.
born dream student that
Thank you.
every Bhagavad Gita teacher dreams of getting.
I'm
Yes,
just like, I think I may have heard this from somebody else, so I'm just saying, I don't know.
that's
I'm just
true. I
saying, yeah.
know. Yeah, yeah, I understand. But still, because it's absolutely true that the original nature of the soul is basically to be full of bliss and happiness. Sat Chit Ananda.
Hmm.
Sat Chit Ananda. So that Sat means it is eternal. Chit means it's full of knowledge. And ananda means you should be happy. Now, definitely, the exchange of love is a very important element in being happy, right?
Hmm.
Now, it's when the soul is covered over by ignorance, it's looking for all this externally in a from a place because it doesn't know it has to come from within. What you said is absolutely correct. And the more we hear and the more we understand and the more we practice bhakti and keep up some minimum practice, automatically that covering and gross covering of ignorance keeps getting wiped. It's like wiping a mirror, wiping. And we start looking for that love and start giving and getting it from some other source. It doesn't mean that you break off all your material relationships. Nobody can function like that. That is impersonalism. But it's just like a fine balance. You're walking a tightrope. You know, these are very remarkable people you've got by your karma as parents and friends and teachers. At the same time, you know that in a second they could vanish. Nobody knows when that's happening. It may be
What?
in the normal course of time or it may be
Hmm.
premature.
What about this? I've heard this also. It's called Tattwamasi.
Yeah,
I think. What does that mean?
that you are.
That.
That's one.
What does that mean
Basically,
exactly?
all right. What it's referring to is that the Lord or God and we are same in quality because the God, Lord is spiritual, we are also originally spiritual. So it's there's a sameness in quality but not in quantity. Why not in quantity? Because the Lord is spiritual and powerful on a scale that we can never be. You remember we talked about our consciousness and awareness that we know what's happening inside us, but He
Yeah.
knows the Paramatma that's happening inside everyone.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. So
That's what it means.
it's basically that okay, it comes back to the soul and the
That you are.
it comes back to the soul and the Paramatma also. That is the
Correct.
like the Paramatma knows what's happening to all the souls, whereas the soul just knows what's happening to itself and its
Itself. Yeah.
connection to the Paramatma. Okay, okay, understood.
Correct. Yeah. So Arjuna, Krishna is going on about how why are you lamenting for the dress of a drowning man? It is just like a garment. And all these verses are there. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya. This is a verse. Jirnani really means garments.
Hmm.
Vasansi. Why don't you just give up with the old garment? You have to like. Why not accept that even the mentors on the other side who you might end up killing, they have to give it up. Then it goes on also about how so many verses just drive home this point to Arjuna, having told him that, having informed Arjuna that his compassion is misplaced because he is lamenting for the external dress of the
Hmm.
people on the other side. Then he drives home the point that the real substance inside a person, the soul, is can never be destroyed. And two, three verses go on about this point, that it cannot be cut by a sword, it cannot be burnt by fire, it cannot be destroyed by water, it cannot be withered by the breeze. It's just eternal, it goes on and on, the
It
soul.
can't be damaged by any material thing, right?
Material, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
Arjuna may wield his sword and slash their faces and chop off their limbs and their facial features, but the soul remains intact.
Hmm.
And when generally I've seen when people first come to know of this, it's a very comforting thought that there's
Yeah.
at least something in this damn world that is eternal, because everything is temporary and changes and slips out of our hands. But there's something that's eternal, it's never going to go away. Very comforting also for
Yeah,
people who
that's also there. But
long,
then also like then also like you have these kind of people who might not sort of understand like what is the soul basically, because like if you I think most people will be like, okay, what is the soul exactly? Is it like, because you can't see it now. Like I remember hearing some talk, I don't know from where it was, but somebody was saying that you have three, like human beings have these three states of consciousness. One is like the body, the other is the
yeah,
mind, and the other is soul. The body
yeah,
is the state of consciousness which is like the one with which we are most of the time interacting with. We're always
exactly.
interacting with the body consciousness. The mind is little lesser. That's where the ego is placed and all these other things happen there. The third one is the soul, where which is like which we don't know, like which people say like it exists in a different space or a different different level. So like most people don't know, have never seen the soul, and it's only in like a very theoretical form. It makes complete sense, like, that the soul does exist, that there is obviously something in this world that connects us, like that holds us together. There is some energy that's there, definitely, but it's very difficult for people to understand or sort of grasp it completely.
or even accept it because
Because
they
they don't
can't
s-
see it,
because they can't
they
see
can't
it,
feel
or they can't see, they can't hear, they can't touch, they can't do any of the senses with it, no. So it's just
it.
there. They just know the only thing they can relate to it is probably in an energy form. It's there in an
Yeah,
energy form, and that's it. So maybe that's where, like,
yeah.
a lot of people might think, oh, what is the soul and all that stuff, but to people who can get it, they understand very quickly what it is.
What you're saying is right, Siddharth, but at the same time, uh, everybody is going to sooner or later find themselves in a situation where a death has occurred. Somebody, even if it's just a distant friend in the office and someone died of COVID and you're told you have to later, go, or of course, COVID times, you can't even go and pay respects to the body. And when you go, the relatives will be wailing and saying, she's gone. My mom is gone. But what's gone? The body is lying there, okay, with the cotton stuffed in the nose and the head tied up so
Mm.
that the mouth and the blood doesn't gush out and so on when things start breaking up inside. But what do they mean she's gone? He's gone because that person, the external form is there. So that means they are actually acknowledging subconsciously or unknowingly that something else was there which has gone, and that is the soul. Even the most hardened atheist, just think of them in this situation, or someone who doesn't believe in the soul. The symptom of the soul is consciousness. Go up to a dead body and you pinch it or you whack it, or it's not going to react. Try doing that to a person who is alive and well, and they will probably hit you back or scream. So, the symptom of the soul is consciousness.
Mm.
It's once the soul goes, the consciousness also goes. And actually, it's quite fascinating if you look at some of the Upanishadic information of what happens after a death occurs. It's saying very coming down from God Himself and from the Shastras. It's saying how once the soul leaves the body, firstly, it can exit from one of the different orifices or the holes. There are so many holes. There is the nose, there is the ears, there is the mouth. When the soul has made its departure through the mouth, you will see a little bit of blood trickling out of the mouth in those kind of deaths. Some
Ah,
cases is through the nose,
nose.
sometimes it's through the ears.
Mm.
Now, some people, I mean, to get down to the bare facts of the situation, you'll see in the process of death, they passed a little stool or urine because it means probably that the soul has left through one of those orifices. The soul has to get out, right? Now, in high level yoga of another age, it was possible for these yogis to go and plan the moment of the departure, and then they would get the soul to rise beyond all the chakras, open up, and it burst from the top of their head. In the process, so much fire would be created, it set the forest on fire. Finally, the blind king Dhritarashtra and his wife, they go, and that is how their end comes.
Mm.
So, but for normal people living in our times, for the soul to exit, it's a huge battle inside. Externally, we think the person passed away peacefully in their sleep. Go and see, because for the soul to get out of this material cage is not an easy thing. But the Lord wills it, and at the correct time, things start to happen, and it goes. Now, once the soul goes out, according to the Katha Upanishad, the Chandogya Upanishad, the Mundaka Upanishad, it explains the soul hovers at the top of the room or wherever they are for a certain period, and it
Mm.
can actually see and hear everything. It can see and hear all our lamentation, or in some cases, people say, "Thank God, all our finally the person's suffering is over." Or if they've been very inconvenienced by the person suffering, they say, "Thank God, finally I wasn't able to take it anymore." Like the caretakers or the caregivers, that soul can see all that. And that is why relatives are advised, when you go where a dead body is lying, don't say negative things. Even if you have scores to settle with a dead person, he took money from you, never gave it back, did something horrible to your family members, don't mention all that. Because these things, hearing all this, it keeps the soul back when the soul should be given the freedom to move away. See? So, after hovering there, then for a certain number of days, if you see our rites and rituals, you have the fifth day ceremony, Then you have the 14th day ceremony, the 41st day ceremony, because that is a period when the soul is still hovering around the things that it really likes, the places it liked, some place where it liked, the person liked to go for a morning walk, some temple that was dear, some workplace where he or she had put all his years of effort and commitment. It hovers, and after that, it starts its journey. Now, when it starts its journey, without going into the details which are given into the Bhagavatam, which of the hells it might go to, depending on what it's done, etc. And mind you, in all this, the Paramatma is traveling with the Atma. Don't forget, he is there as a witness. The soul is never alone. So that's another reason for us not to be frightened of death. One reason why no need to be frightened of death, because we've done it before, so it's doable. Unless you've done it before, you and I wouldn't be sitting here like this in this body. So we can
Yeah.
do it again. The other reason not to be frightened is we are not going to be alone. The Paramatma, he's given his word, he's always there with the Atma, invisible of course. So after this period where it's hovering around familiar places, when it has to cross the Viraja river, somebody from the ancestors is visible and recognizable to this soul. That's why you will see as death is coming close, people will start saying, my grandfather came and called me last night. Some people will even say, I can see my mother standing there, I can see my dead brother standing there, because these are arrangements made by the Lord so that the Atma that is hesitating to get out of this body can get release. If it sees something familiar in the unknown on the other side, it will be more willing to cross over. And according to the Upanishad, there's another fantastic thing that happens, which is before you cross over and get your next body and so on, like on a television screen, all the things that you've done, good and bad, come continuously. They like flash past, and the soul or the consciousness of that dead person is put in a, how do you say, is put in a mode. The default setting is that if the person really regrets and repents, and when we regret and repent, unknowingly we say, oh, you mean I poked something into that boy's eye and blinded him when I was young? Oh, I really beg forgiveness, let that happen to me. Oh, I really stole that person's money. My gosh, I can't believe it, let my money be stolen. The default setting is lamentation and repentance. And in this way, we choose our own karma for the next life. So if we are born blind, there was a stage where we chose it. If we are born or we lose a lot of money at some stage in our life, it's because at some stage before we entered this life and this body, we agreed to those terms. So Krishna and God is always giving us this option of free choice, because the free choice element is very important. And then of course the crossing over across that Viraja river from this material level of the planetary system, that is the toughest. And in Hindu systems, you have things like, you catch the tail of a cow and there is a cow, and that's more like blind belief. I don't want to say anything, but and that particular white cow will help you cross over. And if you don't cross over, then the soul hovers. So the problem with suicides is that according to our scriptures, they get because they are like thrown up the time duration and the opportunity they got in a human birth, they don't that easily get another body. So you have this whole thing of spirits and ghosts and hovering around and
Yeah,
trying.
I recently actually I don't know, recently heard I don't know if you follow Sadhguru, but I listened to
I sometimes get his videos and hear.
uh,
Yeah, I have a friend who's a follower. I do.
yeah.
I don't hear from him.
So like I
Yeah.
had listened to a video in which he spoke about this ghost actually, and he said the exact same thing that you just said basically, which is that after the soul dies, basically there's like this point after the person dies, the soul kind of like it's like hovers, like as you said, no, it goes around the places and all stuff. So he
Yes.
gave the example of like if somebody is like if there's a car accident, for example, and
Uh-huh.
this person dies just suddenly, the soul didn't want to die. It wasn't the
That's right.
moment for the soul to go away, it
Correct.
had to, like, it just suddenly happened. And then the soul is kind of like trying to figure out, okay, it just suddenly happened. Now I need to deal with the situation right now, and it'll be there. So it's like in
Mhm.
that context only ghosts exist. It doesn't exist in the other context wherein, like, the ghost is in the house. You see in Hollywood movies and all, where there'll be a ghost in the house, and they'll, like, what do you say, like, go around and scare people. That's not how it actually exists. It just exists in the form like in that form only ghosts exist. Where like if you think about it, where the soul is like trying to figure out a way to leave, be content, be
Correct, correct.
happy, like understand. Like if the person like lives for let's say like 100 years, and he's like in the end he's peaceful. A person is peaceful and the person dies. The soul is
Right.
also kind of peaceful, and immediately goes to the next body after that. Doesn't have to think too much on other stuff, right?
Right.
And because the thing is everybody around this person was also very at peace with this person passing away, and this
Correct.
person also was at peace. He understood that he has only this much time anyways to live, and the soul also everything is like very peaceful, and then it moves on automatically. But then when something tragic happens, then the soul has to kind of sort of figure out
Sure, sure.
exactly like how to
Absolutely.
how to make sense of everything and all that stuff, and then move on, like
Sure.
I feel like karma plays a huge role in all of this. Like I because I'm a big believer in karma, in the sense like I was just thinking, I think the night only I was thinking like that question is there, no, like why do good things happen to like sorry why do bad things happen to good people?
Happen to good people. Right.
So I was thinking about this like a lot, and I kind of I don't know if this is like whether you agree with it or not, but I was thinking like if there's a person like an ordinary person, right? Like a person who gets up, let's say a person who's 30 years old, he gets up from his bed, he gets ready to go to the office, he drives the car to the office, he has breakfast, he has lunch, he works throughout the day, and he comes back home. But what does he do in between? When he gets up from the thing, he has breakfast. Let's say he has bread and egg. Okay,
Right.
then then he gets up, then then after that he gets ready, he's going to the office, he drives a car which is fuel engine car, there's like smoke coming out of it, right? So
Right.
like you would think that this person who's leading this very ordinary life is a very good person. Everybody assumes that this person is good, but maybe the reasons why this person something bad happens to him, but the reason why this something bad happens to him is because he's the small things. Karma works in such subtle ways where you can't even see how it's like having an impact. So if you drive a fuel engine car, in some ways, whether you like it or not, you're contributing to global warming, you're contributing to
Contamination and
contamination.
pollution.
So now you don't think that much about it,
Correct. Correct.
and everybody doesn't think that much about it, but then in that small way you are contributing to some slight negative karmas being produced. When you have
Sure.
like let's say non-veg food for example, then
Sure.
also there's it's like in the context of things, maybe like the karma is not that severe, it's just a little bit,
Sure.
but over time it develops into this big thing, and then it just has to get released, and then maybe
Absolutely
that's
correct.
why bad things happen to good people. So
Absolutely correct. This karmic explanation is the only explanation really for so much that happens. And but the point is then that we need to make real full use of our this birth that we have and make informed choices. To the extent I agree fully that you drive a fuel car, or you even travel in a fuel car, even someone else is driving. You can't avoid the karmic implications because you are contributing to the maybe the potential cancer for
hmm.
so many people around you. It's yeah, we are trapped in a material world where that's actually the whole point. It's going to come to where Arjuna is crying and saying, "I'm utterly confused." That there is everything becomes so complex, and there is complexity all around us that we get baffled because even if you want to do only good things, it's like we are not allowed to. We are
Hmm.
part of a system where we can't avoid harming and injuring others. And by taking that logic step forward, as you are saying, it's invariably you're going to get the karmic reaction for that.
Hmm.
So this, as far as talk of the soul is concerned, the next question that comes up. So Arjuna, Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna that you ought not to be lamenting for the dress of a drowning man. Now Arjuna's other kind of issue was he had an issue with this, that will he get sinful reaction for killing his mentors in the war. To which that was another reason why he was hesitating to fight. To which Krishna is telling him that it's your duty as a Kshatriya to do this war, to do this fighting. Now the thing about duty is you don't get reaction for some duty that you've done because it is according to religious principles or according to what principles have been laid down by the Lord, and his
Hmm.
spoken words are translated into texts like this and so through scripture, to scriptural Vedic injunctions. So he is not going to get sinful reactions provided he is fighting for religious principles and as ordained by the Lord or as ordered by the Lord. And the other thing about duty is it not only makes life easier in a sense if someone could tell us what's our duty and we can bring ourselves to do it. Other thing is that duty really, when you bring it down to its bare essentials, it means tolerating. Tolerating. If it is the duty of a woman in a house to cook, no matter whether it is the height of summer and no matter whether it's water shortage or not, you just cook. If it is the duty of the man to keep going for his job, no matter how difficult the job circumstances are because the family is waiting, or the woman also contributes by getting money or whatever. It's a duty of the student to somehow do the exams. It's a duty of each one of us. So it means tolerance. And if you can develop tolerance, it's a huge facility to get through in this very difficult world.
Yeah.
Summer comes, yeah, okay, you can sit in an AC room with which then that creates new problems because an air conditioning the system doesn't suit everyone. Winter comes, people are freezing to death. In places like Uttarakhand, where I have friends in Ranikhet, sometimes the power goes and doesn't come back for 2-3 days, and there are people who survive the winter only with thermal blankets. So as she says, there's nothing you can do. You can't charge your phones. You're freezing. The water is frozen. Forget about bathing, even drinking water, everything is a problem.
Hmm.
So what do? The seasons come and the seasons go. So duty teaches us to tolerate and do what we are supposed to do in a situation. So it's developing a real skill in us, an ability to tolerate. That's another thing why duty is stressed so much in Vedic injunctions. It's like a safeguard for us. Once
Hmm.
we learn to tolerate like this, then we can tolerate no matter how bad the situations turn.
Hmm.
You're not like thrown off balance and so on. So Arjuna is told clearly, no need to worry for simple reactions because if you do your duty, you don't get it. And as for enjoying, Arjuna is concerned that, what's the use of winning and how will I enjoy? It's a point. Like it's more fun if you can share something you bought, you can show it to a lot of people, or throw a party and share your achievement, your promotion. So there's nobody on the other side, everyone's dead. Who is you going to share with?
Hmm.
For which Krishna's answer is either you win and you become king here, or even if you die, you go to the Swarga Loka or the heavenly planets because it's given that a Kshatriya who dies on the battlefield, even if he is defeated, goes straight to Swarga Loka. And Swarga Loka, the heavenly planets, is just right above our planets. There are many stages beyond that. And one great thing about the heavenly planets is its long life, unlimited goodies to eat and drink, beautiful human beings, uh, basically lot of scope and facility for enjoyment. So, of course, people get fed up even of that because it's in Swarga Loka that Indra, from time to time, Lord God Indra becomes insecure and nervous that he's losing his position and does all this, plotting and planning that creates so many episodes where God has to intervene or the Supreme Lord has to intervene. So that's how Krishna is trying to,
So,
uh,
I
yeah,
have one doubt with regards to this. Like, people always say this word Vaikunta, no? What is
yeah,
Vaikunta actually? What is Vaikunta then? Isn't that heaven or
no. Heavenly planets is one level, like you say, ground floor. I'm now sitting on a flat in the ground floor, and there is the first floor where I have my friend Shiva Sunita living there. Now, the Vaikunta planets are planets in the highest realm where Vishnu personally resides, and Vaikunta literally means without suffering, without sorrow. So to get to Vaikunta is it is the highest goal. There are so many different levels in the planetary system that if you get into the Bhagavatam, I'll send you a diagram that it's very
hmm,
thought provoking. But making it to Vaikunta is not easy. Making it to the Swargaloka or the heavenly planets means that when your pious credit is over, you come boom, zoom back right to this miserable world. Getting up to Vaikunta, basically it's understood that you earned the right to serve the Lord directly and to live happily there. But there's always service and there's always individuality. Never does the individual soul fuse and become one, as often it's very misleading information given in religious arenas. The individual soul doesn't fuse with the Supreme Lord. That's a misconception. It retains its individuality because only then can then be duality and there can be a relationship. You can do things and you can fight and you can play and so on.
So the people in the Swargaloka,
Swargaloka, Swargam,
the
yeah, Swargaloka.
Swargaloka, they are like you mentioned Indra and you mentioned all these beings, and if you do,
The
if you
demigods, what are called the
demigods.
demigods. Yeah.
So what is preventing them from getting into Vaikuntha then? Like what is like
I told you, you come up with these questions that are very thought provoking. Yeah. So, okay, what is stopping Indra from different things? I will try and tell you very briefly. You heard of the Govardhan Leela? Do you know about
Govardhan,
it
the
rains
yeah,
and
it rained
rains?
and then Krishna
Yeah,
caught the mountain and then Indra came
right.
to like, yeah, I know,
That's
yeah.
right.
Hmm.
Now, what really happened there will answer your question, because that cowherd community, until the appearance of Krishna as a boy born in their midst, were used to basically revering only Indradev, because they depended on rain for
Rain.
their harvesting and their grain, and the grain fed the cows, and the cows gave the milk and so on. The farmers, Vaishyas, farmers, the community. When Krishna came, he came with this challenge to them. And when their annual day to worship Indra came, he said, "No need to worship Indra, just worship me. Just worship me, and we can have a great time." And he convinced them somehow to put aside their plans and to worship him. So while they were worshipping him, Indra Dev got furious, because Indra has his ego. A demigod has his position and his ego, and he had not recognized Krishna for what he was. So what happens is that he uses his weapon, which is rain and water, and there is so much rain that the people there in Govardhan, in that part of Uttar Pradesh and Mathura district, they started to get really frightened. And Krishna used, because they thought they'd be flooded out of their homes, and this would be like a real catastrophe. So Krishna uses his little finger, and for so many days in a row, he holds up the Govardhan mountain as a umbrella for them. So they realize his greatness, and Indra Dev is shamed, and then Indra comes and personally begs forgiveness for trying to outsmart Krishna, recognizes him as the supreme personality, not different from Vishnu, begs forgiveness, and then there's a whole very sweet pastime where he worships Krishna and brings a Surabhi cow to give milk
Hmm.
to wash Krishna's lotus feet. And all this is in a beautiful, beautiful place. Even today, if you go called Govind Kund in Govardhan, I went and spent 1 month in Govardhan
Hmm.
serving some Russian men and women, devotees. They wanted someone to be their kind of handy person. Go to the
Hmm.
market and buy sabji, speak Hindi, fix up a rickshaw for them, speak the language, take them to the doctor. So I volunteered, and I spent in 2010 a whole month, and it was marvelous that Govardhan, despite all the commercialism that has come, and the golf club, and the all kind of crazy things happening there, Govardhan is Govardhan. Especially if you go in Kartik Mass, there's a particular Mass when the Damodar Leela took place. It's coming soon. It's starting October 20th, and devotees generally go there. But these pastime places, Govinda Kund, full of green water and monkeys and peacocks and birds and trees, even 5,000 years later, it's very much like that, the pristine quality. So Indradev was humbled. Why does he choose to be in Swargaloka? Basically, because he has his ego and he has his role to play. You see, he has a role there. There are always going to be human beings at different levels of consciousness. There will be people who don't want the topmost goal. They want a long time enjoyment in this beautiful Swargaloka, and they do lots of rituals, traditional Brahmana families to try to go there. And Indra has to be there to facilitate that whole world and its enjoyment. Like, there will be the mall where you can get everything under one roof, and there will also be some people still prefer to go to individual shops and do that stuff. But
Hmm.
instead, you go to Travancore Mall in Kalkotam or wherever it is, you get everything under one roof. So
Hmm.
people have different tastes because they're individuals. And God respects that individuality and makes according to their level, He facilitates for their onward progress. Now, Vaikuntha is generally touted, or touted is too maybe too strong a word, as the ultimate for pious Hindus and others, devotees, non-Hindu, whatever. What is then the drawback for Vaikuntha? Why is it that Krishna worshippers don't talk about Vaikuntha and they say Goloka, Goloka, Goloka Vrindavan? I want to go to Goloka. That's another planet at that realm. Because in Vaikuntha, the worship very much along the lines of it's formal and there is awe and reverence. You get me? You have a formal relationship maybe with an uncle, but you have a very informal relationship with your father. There's a difference. Now, for some people, that awe and reverence is fine. They like things to keep it formal and there is respect and distance. For some other people, they are restless in that formal mood. They feel very restricted. They want total freedom to express their affection and with the Lord. So they aspire for Goloka where their free dealings are possible. And there is no awe and reverence. God himself doesn't expect it.
So then,
There's
like
a lot.
in that case, that's why, like God, like if you say take Krishna or Vishnu, they are not expecting us to be in that place. They're expecting us to be in, or are they like, do they want us to be there because it's like formal and, as you
No,
said, like.
you see, each one has our own inclination. Someone wants to be an engineer, someone wants to be a medico or whatever.
Mhm.
So they respect our individuality. There are lots of people who make it to Vaikuntha and stay there happily because the inclination of their soul is that kind of formal dealings with God. So God takes that form there and remains there as Vishnu with Lakshmi Devi and watching and in his munificence and his greatness. He doesn't do little childish antiques like Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan.
So
It's a
in
very different.
Vaikuntha, like there's no like the same. There's no it's not the same as Swargaloka where you have all these pleasures and all that stuff.
No,
Nothing of
no,
that is
no,
there.
no, no. It's way beyond Swargaloka. It's way beyond Swargaloka because why once you get or you qualified and you make it to Vaikuntha, you can just stay there. You don't come boom down back to this when your pious credits are over. You serve the Lord Vishnu in some mood or the other. Not, mood is always is one of awe and reverence, but you serve him in some capacity or the other. In some others don't want to go there at all because they feel very restricted. It's their nature. They find it very. They want more freedom to express. So really, the Lord respects our individuality. It doesn't put the whole lot of us inside one sardine can and says everybody somehow make it over many lifetimes to Vaikuntha or go only to Goloka. It's not like that. Like you just said, for you, your Ishta Devata is Hanuman. That's individuality. It would be very wrong of anyone to try to smash that and say, oh, just forget all about Hanumanji. You just come to, only Krishna. It would be very wrong. It would be very harmful to the natural inclination of your soul. But at the
So
same time, we have to,
yeah, no, continue.
we have to know what is what. Hanuman himself is such a great bhakta of Lord Ram. By some great good fortune, if in some lifetime you actually get darshan of Hanuman, what is he going to tell you? Worship my Lord. He will pass you on and say, for me, you want to please me, or now just move and worship Ram, who is, everything for Ram, Sita, or whatever. At the same time, like we have to know, as I said, what roles they play. So basically, the role of there is Lord Shiva's role to do the Tandava dance and to destroy when a yuga has to come to an end. That is his big role. And there is a belief that when we worship Lord Shiva very sincerely, he then literally kind of turns us in the direction of Vishnu or Krishna worship. There's this belief because he appreciates and takes it and
Yeah,
uses in his
because
own.
Shiva, I don't know where, but I read somewhere that Shiva only says that I am. I don't know if Shiva says it or Vishnu says it. I'm not sure, but I think one of them says that. I think Vishnu says it that the most loyal and the most my greatest
Loving
devotee is Shiva. The
Shiva,
greatest
yeah.
devotee of Lord Vishnu is Shiva, basically. And Shiva also says
Sure.
that, like all the time that he's meditating in the Himalayas, it's all meditation towards Vishnu, or, in that sense, like, he's
Yeah.
meditating to Vishnu itself. Yeah.
When his consort and wife Parvati approaches him for some advice, he says, don't worship me, go to Vishnu or some form of Vishnu and for some form of Krishna because Mukti Pradata Vishnu Eva Asamshaya. That if it is Mukti you want, the giver, the Pradata or the giver of that Mukti is Vishnu Asamshaya. There is no doubt about it. So don't just keep serving me, but also serve, go beyond me. So they're all there really to help us on our journey back. There's no doubt about it. Now, what
Isn't
is Devi's?
just
Yeah,
one last, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
oh, sure. Go ahead. Yeah,
Since I have
yeah.
this one last doubt, like I don't know, is Hanuman like an avatar of Shiva?
I
I
think
think I've heard it somewhere that he is, no?
there actually is a lot of these things are bandied around, especially on the internet, and some of it has got to do with
Mm.
certain sects and their beliefs.
Mm.
But to the best of my knowledge, Hanuman is a great renunciate as a brahmachari and a great Rama Bhakta and a Ramadasan. But I have not heard of his being an incarnation of Lord Shiva, whereas in some temples in Uttarakhand, they do have some such temples to this the basic idea. But I don't think it's a bona fide idea coming from a bona fide source. Now, before we
Yeah.
move away from this topic, if you
Mm.
want to hear Devi's extraordinary role,
Yeah.
ഞാൻ പഠിപ്പിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നു ഇപ്പൊ അല്ല. So that is just my mediclaim agent. I told him not to
Yeah,
call
no
me.
problem, no problem.
He is like that. Devi's extraordinary role in the scheme of things, Devi or Durga or Parvati, you can call her by any of these names. Durg actually means a fort. All right, it means a fort. So Durga and her role is to create a beautiful prison house and to keep us prisoners in here. Just see the extraordinary arrangements. So we normally go to Devi, especially the women, to give us all Aishwaryangal, all facilities, a good husband, a good happy home, sufficient money, beauty, etc. Children growing up. So Devi is very popular amongst men and women, and without her blessings, generally they say family life won't go properly. Now, what is her specific role? If you go, you dive into the Shastras and dive into the Bhagavatam, it is her duty given by Lord Vishnu to keep us all trapped in this great prison. You know, the quality of the prison you may be a VIP prisoner and you may be an ordinary prisoner, but you're still in a prison, right? You're shackled by this material body and the limitations of this world. So it's like that's her role. And but the minute someone wants to get out of that prison, she just backs off and she directs that jiva to the worship of Krishna and Vishnu. And I mean, she doesn't then keep shackling. She allows you to find sources through which you can get more information. So that is the role of Devi. So
So
Devi is considered.
Devi is another word for Lakshmi, right?
No, there's a difference. Yeah,
Oh, okay,
Lakshmi is as in the consort of Vishnu. There she just serves Vishnu, and yes, her role is still to keep giving these Aishwaryangal. But when we say Devi, we specifically mean Durga, Kamakshi, Parvati, different rupams and different temples. So many
so
temples are there.
she's like she's in charge of wealth and prosperity, where she's like she like if
Yeah,
you pray
all
to her,
fortunes,
then all fortunes that you pray to her, she'll give you that prosperity.
material
Yeah.
fortunes that are required to make a material life a success. Okay, so it is that is her role. So once we understand this, what we generally do is, of course, one needs some fortune. How are we going to get through? And then you have in India, we have the concept of a Kudumba Devi, Kudumba Devata. We don't want to hurt anybody's sentiments, and we continue respecting. But if you really want to start getting out of this whole cycle of birth and death, and to that very loving exchanges, you have to come to Krishna and Vishnu worship. Because if it's at the level of Devi and Shiva and Ganapati and others, it is still like a business deal. We are frightened, we go make these offerings and say, please give us this in return. You know, I'm very going to be very loyal to you, but make sure that everything goes smoothly in my family. It's fear-based. There is some lot of respect. It is fear-based and it's like striking a deal. So some stage the jiva wants to go beyond that business deal. You know, it's like Indians who go abroad. I don't want to mention any specific country, but they've come back with this. It's just the way that system works. Okay, I might as well say it. In America, I have very good friends amongst Americans, but that when you're new and they will say, what would you like to have, and you will order, would you like a coffee, would you like a muffin or donut to go with it, and so on. After you finished eating, they will say, this is the bill. Okay, so the Indian who's going from Indian culture, where a atithi or a guest is warmly received, there's no question of his paying for what he's eaten. He feels very let down or confused, and it often sets his whole mood towards that country and his culture in the wrong way. Why is it? Because nobody likes business dealings. We are really craving for some genuine affectionate. Someone bought us a coffee or a muffin and a donut, though they didn't know anything about us. We are new in the country, they want to make us feel at home. It hurts, it rankles. Not that we couldn't afford to pay for the coffee or the donut, but the whole mood, it irritates. In the same way, with dealings with gods, demigods are at one level. Yeah, I mean, you pray and you make a deal with them. These many coconuts will be broken, and you keep your word and everything. That's their role. As long as you're satisfied with that lower level of worship, they are there so that you can target your worship towards them. Minute you want to go beyond, those start opening. So all these gods and goddesses are there really to help us on our journey back.
So I understand. So like we are at a much lower level in terms of our spirituality. So we are
Yeah,
reaching to people like the demigods, and like, maybe like the demigods are in one level, then you've got like, other gods and all that stuff. Then you've got maybe
yeah,
Vishnu at the highest level, Vishnu or Krishna.
yeah,
So like it's like you have to get to one level and then finally you get to the God ultimately, like that. So I
yeah.
think, is that the thing? Like basically that's the thing, right?
Yeah, and don't forget this journey may be across lifetimes.
Mm.
Yeah, it's wrong to think that we can get it all right one shot. It may not work like that. There are different setbacks and disappointments, and we may even lose faith totally in any god. Then again, someone comes to our rescue and we come back. We've suffered such terrible tragedies. We don't want to believe there is a god. This happens. The jiva gets bewildered.
Basically
But this
this lifetime I'm praying to Hanuman. So it's I'll have, maybe next lifetime I'll have to like maybe go to the next level or something. I don't know.
no, actually, we shouldn't concern ourselves too much with this, in the
Ah,
sense that we should just be happy doing what we are doing. It's very important because it keeps that free flow of devotional feelings.
mm,
And by worshipping Hanuman, if there's even a little bit that you can do for Vishnu or Krishna, you will see that we're going to come through to a verse that is never
mm,
forgotten in the bank, the spiritual bank passbook.
mm,
It's everything else is forgotten. Like you are now a podcaster and you have your training and you have whatever. I have my training as an art historian, and I studied fine arts and taught in the National Museum in Delhi for so many years. But in my next life, all that counts for nothing. I still have to start going to school from nursery. But this other knowledge that I have gathered and shared stays with me, and at an opportune moment it is revived or revoked inside the heart. So it's like a vasana. Some people with music, some
mm.
children can suddenly they hear a tune and they can play it on the piano or on the keyboard. Where is it coming from? They already covered that distance in a previous life. And in all probability, it was not material. That's why it's gone with them into the next life. This maths wizard, Shakuntala Devi, where is this coming from?
She's, yeah.
No,
Like people have all kinds of extraordinary intelligence and they're able to like, do some extraordinary thing. How, where is all that come? Like they have like they call prodigies, no? Like
correct, correct. Genius, absolutely.
prodigies.
Prodigy, prodigy.
Uh,
Yeah.
I said
Mm.
prodigies. Okay.
Prodigy, correct, yeah. Never
Yeah.
mind.
So.
So
Hmm.
now what Krishna is going to do is, then the question arises, what does the soul look like and why can't we see it? And that he's answering here. And actually it's in the purports to this Srila
Hmm.
Prabhupada's translation of the Bhagavad Gita, that a lot of additional shlokas and text is given, that according to our scriptures, the soul size, it sounds illogical that how can it be, but the size is given as 1 by 10,000th size of the tip of the hair. Now think about it. It's like impossible. It's completely impossible to our mind. Hair tip
1,000,
is
1,000 the size of the tip of the hair.
one
One
divided,
by
1 by 10,000.
10,000, the size of the tip of the hair.
Yeah, how is it possible? It just seems completely crazy, right? The tip of the hair we can
Hmm.
see. You just have to pluck a strand and see. So what can be? So then the answer is given that that soul is visible only by perfected intelligence. In someone who is spiritually so aware, you have rare cases. Sometimes it's all just cooked up. People will say, as he was dying, I saw something going out of his mouth. Often it's just this, it's they have heard all this and they just repeat it. But you will have the rare spiritually advanced individual who knows somebody is going to die, who has a premonition, who has prior knowledge, and can see that death occurring, can probably even see that. It's very rare. Because as how can you see something that's so tiny? So how do we know it's there? By its symptom, which is consciousness.
Hmm.
When the soul is in the body, the person has consciousness. When the soul has left, the person loses consciousness.
So I have one question with regards to this. If a soul leaves the
Yeah,
body, does
yeah.
that is that soul no longer associated with that person ever again? Like in the sense, like if is it like if it goes to another body, does it lose the
Yeah,
previous identity?
completely, but memory may be there. That's why you hear of this
Hmm.
past life regression and children growing up and remembering so many people in the village they were in and who murdered whom
Ah,
and
okay,
so on.
okay.
Yeah, this is, and of course, now you have this whole so-called modern, it's a kind of new age thing, past life regression. You sit with somebody and through hypnosis they make you take it back. I don't know the validity of all that, but this other one, how the other cases of how a child suddenly, before he's exposed properly to
Remembers.
the world, remembers.
Hmm.
Why? Because along with the soul, and that the Bhagavad Gita tells us very clearly in another chapter, along with the soul, when the soul travels out of the body and goes, the mind and intelligence also travel with the soul.
Hmm.
So the mind is going, again, it's abstract. What do you mean by mind? You can't see something floating and going. Even now, I mean, even if I were to break open someone's head, I can't see. I just know there is this abstract term called mind. But the mind has is a repository of all our experiences and thoughts and feelings.
Hmm.
So that's what goes with the soul. And in the next body, that mind, which is like an endless, unlimited GB, unlimited storage space. So through so many lifetimes, the mind is there going with a repository of so many thoughts and experiences. And if the Supreme Lord wishes, he can just lift the veil, if you like, and make the person remember a little bit of something from a previous life. That's what's happening in these remarkable cases. Why is it happening? Really, if you ask me, I think the Lord is basically using these people to show how these things happen. That it's a fact that the soul goes and the mind goes with it.
Also,
Because
then
either
the mm, also the
yeah,
question
also,
of like free will, no? Like
yeah,
God could easily say that every living thing should come to me, and just create like living things or living beings and say everybody comes to me. But the fact that like God gives the free will to people to like choose what they want to do, and say that this lifetime it doesn't work, next time like next lifetime also it doesn't work, but the third lifetime it might you might make some progress after like
yeah,
maybe 15 or 20, 30, 40, god knows how many lifetimes. You get to some level where you're like, okay, I'm on this path, and then finally you get to a point where the soul is like, okay, I've understood, like I need to come to god now. I need to get to Vaikuntha, let's say, let's put it that way. I need to get to
yeah,
Vaikuntha in the end. So the fact that like that free will exists is like it's pretty yeah, it's pretty amazing, because like it's pretty
uh-huh,
remarkable in that sense, like that we like human beings, like we struggle with the concept of free will. Like we think that god controls everything, but actually maybe god doesn't. And god is like telling you, like if you want to do this, you can do it. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it, but then at some point you will do it. It's like that basically.
yeah. No, because there's so much freedom given because again we are individuals, and
Hmm.
a bona fide God is not going to like just expect us to do something because it has to be done.
Hmm.
That's not the mood at all. A God, a bona fide God, and particularly Krishna and Vishnu, most of all, what they like is the sweetness of this voluntary surrender. Even if it happens in fits and starts, it happens after many lifetimes. is voluntary turning towards the Supreme Lord and then tasting and exploring, that they appreciate most of all. Of course, they are hoping that each one of us eventually will want to get out. We are parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord in quality, it's a Tattvamasi, not in quantity. So we want to be rejoined with the original whole. But it can't happen like that in just one lifetime or suddenly. And it's not easy because there are so many distractions and we lack qualification. But yeah, the element of freedom and free choice is very important. That's why even in parenting, in teacher-student relations, in boss and the employee relations, this being able to give some freedom of choice is a very important thing to keep the relationship sweet. Otherwise, it becomes like a suffocating, unhappy situation, both sides trading charges and grievances. So, even at a simple level, we can look at it. Of course, there has to be some discipline, some authority, and do's and don'ts, you know, but some freedom has to be there to express, to tell our problems, to make some changes, some flexibility, and that a bona fide God is always willing, always ready to do it.
I
That's a
think.
great thing about spirituality. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people always want to know like what people also I think want to know how to better themselves, but they don't know. They don't. I think they get lost in trying to in the means in which they try to get better themselves. So
Absolutely.
they look, they look to other people or they look to other things and they think that this thing or this person is going to give me some kind of satisfaction, some kind of help. But it doesn't work that way. Like every time I go through something, whether it's like some kind of accomplishment or some kind of failure, I always have this attitude that like it's temporary. Even this person who's complimenting me, this person who's being nice to me, it's a temporary thing. Like after some time, like it'll just go away. This person who's being bad to me, this person who's being rude to me, or this person is being like very nasty or saying something bad, I'm like, it's a very temporary thing. I just have to like just let it go. It'll just go.
Mm.
And like I've noticed that like letting go of the things that like are like when letting go of things where it's very difficult to hear is very difficult. But like the more you practice that, it becomes second nature. After some time it gets used to it. So like I've
So
been doing meditation now for I think almost since August 16th. So it's been like already 48 days now since I've been doing regular meditation every day in the morning. But
what do you
initially,
focus on? What
like
do
so
you do?
initially
Just
initially
dance or
initially it was mantra meditation where
okay.
I would chant like Hare Krishna, and
Uh-huh.
the whole time. Then after some time, I felt like maybe this is like getting a bit, I wanted some centeredness in my mind. So I wasn't
Okay.
getting that well by chanting, and for some reason I don't know why. So then I
Okay.
just thought, okay, let me just focus on my breath. I'll just focus on the breath, and
Uh-huh.
then now I do a mixture of breath and this mantra.
I
So like
understand.
so the breath and the mantra together acts as a good combination for me, where I'm like
Uh-huh.
initially I focus on the breath. I'm breathing and then I focus on the breath and suddenly I'll be okay, now is the perfect time to say the mantra. Because if you just start
Okay.
saying it with just without any
Okay.
preparation, then it doesn't have any
Understand.
effect. Yeah, so then like that's so, and the thing is the effect of it is so it's amazing because there are many times where I've gone through some kind of difficulty and the meditation, that because it's so calming, it helps in that situation. Like I'm like
Okay.
I immediately understand, okay, I have to be calm. Like I've been I
Great.
have to, yeah, so that so I think those things also are very important in the path of spiritual growth. Like I think it's important. Like it's not, I think, enough to just hear the spiritual sort of information. I think it's important also to like meditate on some level and to like
Practice. Yeah, the
pray.
practice.
Yeah,
Something you have to
yeah.
do regularly to connect. It's like a dial-up connection with God. You have to
Hmm.
practice. And for our Yuga, Kali Yuga, the recommended method is very much like you're saying,
Hmm.
just chanting or remembering. It's not enough just to get this information theoretically. The practice or the process has to be taken up. Do you keep your eyes open or keep your eyes closed when you're
Close,
doing all this?
close.
So, because this is a question that I get asked often, why not have your Ishta Devata photo or something right in front and look? But the minute you open your eyes, the danger is of distraction. You see something else and you think of something else, and
So I try to
so I
imagine. I try to
imagine
imagine. So I'll
to
imagine like
remember.
initially when I first started, no, I had a lot of thoughts going in my mind. Everything was flowing. then after some time, because I'm doing it for 48 days now, after a point I reached a stage where those thoughts didn't come. I could just directly start focusing on one thing. But then the problem with that was that my mind was getting a bit like like disturbed with just focusing on one thought. Like I wanted to it started like I started feeling like I need to focus on something else now. Like I focused
Uh-huh.
on Krishna and all that stuff, but my mind is like telling me, look, you got to focus on something else. Like, there's something else that needs to be, or a different form. So then I like now so then I started focusing on breath, and that has made a big difference. So I think like it's just trying to master different sort of like things. You're trying to master
I,
different thoughts. Like, yeah, I don't.
I think you're trying to get your mind ready for the chanting. That's what you're doing
Hmm.
through the breathing.
Yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of even a lot of regular ISKCON practitioners do this because, as you say, suddenly if you sit down and chant, the mind is not ready.
It's they won't
It's
come.
just done other things. Yeah, either you washed your face or did something. So, to breathing is a good way because you get your mind a little under control and then you go into the chanting.
Hmm. Oh, I think you're frozen, Supriya Chechi. Are you here? Hello. 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 Okay. Sorry guys, there was a slight technical issue in between, but yeah, we're just gonna continue. So, what were we discussing? Like, I think we were talking about,
Ready for chant. Yeah, the
hmm,
mind
hmm,
getting ready for the chant through
yeah,
by doing some breathing exercises. How regularly practitioners do that. That was what I was saying, and that
yeah, meditation.
it has process a daily process. It's not enough, like you said, to theoretically hear. Yeah. Okay. Are you there?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I just thought I'd disconnect my mic. Yeah. So shall we just look at what's left of this section of the
Yeah, yeah,
Bhagavad
sure,
Gita?
sure. Yeah.
So Krishna is finished telling Arjuna different things, answering his doubts at different levels. It's now giving information about what the soul looks like and what the size is and who is qualified to see it. Only somebody with perfect intelligence or perfected intelligence. How nothing can destroy the soul. So there's no reason at all for Arjuna to lament, even if he's the cause of the death of those on the Kaurava side.
Hmm.
The point here is, yeah, then there's a crucial point here. Krishna also gives him the other side, the flip side of the coin, that if after hearing all this, Arjuna just decides that he doesn't want to fight, as he's saying, he wants to go and live in the forest as a beggar, he's going to run away from the battlefield. Contrary to what Arjuna is thinking, that it is because of his compassion that he is leaving the battlefield, the world and the public are going to see him as someone who basically ran away out of for his life as a coward. And Krishna is pointing out to him that that would be unbearable for him, for the Kshatriya nature, to tolerate that kind of disgrace.
Hmm.
There's a very valid point he's making, because if our mentors and teachers can understand our nature, and they tell us, don't do this, because the result is that you will be perceived like this and you won't be able to take it. I've seen parents with very ambitious children there, and the child comes with some fantastic plan. And so far, the child has been always like A plus, or first in the class. Suddenly, he's coming with some fantastic plan that someone has put into him. And the child, I've seen this happen. The parent will tell the child, don't try for this, because it's unlikely you're going to succeed. It's way beyond your capacities. I mean, he may not say this bluntly. And if you don't get it, you won't be able to accept the failure.
Hmm.
I've seen this happen. And that kind of child who all his life has known only A plus and A plus, suddenly by his karma, whatever tries for something, doesn't get it, is considered a failure, takes it very badly, has taken his life because he just doesn't know how to deal with failure. So it's very wise of Krishna to point out to Arjuna that it is Kshatriya fighting nature where so much importance is given to pride and achievement. He's fought so many big battles. He's defeated Lord Shiva and got the Pashupata Astra. He's defeated Lord Indradev and got the Gandiva bow from him as a reward. So with this history of achievements, suddenly he's seen fleeing the battlefield because he they will just say that he just got frightened and scared and left. And that talk Arjuna won't be able to take. So mind you, at a later stage in the Mahabharata war, Krishna himself leaves the battlefield. You know why? Because Rukmini sends him like an SOS, a distress letter, saying that my brother is going to marry me off to somebody completely unsuitable. Please come and save me. You know I'm yours. So Krishna goes there and kidnaps Rukmini. Therefore, you have this great kidnapping of Rukmini in the Bhagavad Katha series. That's very much highlighted.
But this happens
because-
in between the like that where he's telling. Okay.
Not in between the Bhagavad Gita. in the course of
Mahabharata. Okay.
And as a result of running away from the battlefield, Krishna is given the name Ranachor, a thief who ran away from the Ranabhumi, the Ran of Kutch. This is like that particular kind of battle desert kind of situations. So Krishna himself did this, but Krishna can take it because it is one of his leelas. He doesn't care. But Arjuna, cast in a Kshatriya mode, won't be able to do it. See what good advice it is, because that's why it's very important to find a mentor, spiritual mentor who understands your nature. It is not just this about formally taking initiation and making some vows and getting a new spiritual name and etc. All the trappings that go with it. They have their place, but it's essentially reaching the feet, if you like, of a spiritual mentor who understands you.
Understood. So it's important, but like how many people have that option of getting a spiritual mentor also? It's not easy.
And that's why when we come to chapter 4, this concept of a spiritual teacher, master, mentor, or a guru as he's known, and our world is teeming with false gurus. So that's also a problem. But we will explore that topic a little more.
So I think
About-
in that sense, like I think maybe we can call it a day, call it a session today then. So yeah, we'll wind it up. But this was a very good. I mean, today was a very good session. I learned a lot. So
I also very much.
thank you so much. So like I'll be putting up this video on YouTube so that more people can see it and maybe understand maybe a bit better about the whole thing. Yeah. All right.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Supriya Chechi. Until next week. Again. We'll do it.
Thank you.
No problem.
And next, just wanted to, before you cut me off,
Yeah.
normally I overlooked today. I should have started by just invoking Krishna's name because he's the author of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Hare Krishna mantra. That
Hare
takes
Krishna.
just like say 5 minutes. And followed by that, because I'm using the text translated by Srila Prabhupada sitting here, there's a 5 second mantra which is said to him. But we got straight into the talk, so I doing that because that's the proper
fine.
etiquette.
Yeah.
Next time, just repeat me in case I
Yeah,
forget.
yeah. I'll do that. I'll definitely do that. Sure. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Supriya
Thank
Chechi. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.